Hello and welcome to Gradient Connect. Gradient Connect is a series of interviews conducted with key industry personalities. And today we are speaking to Dulith Herath, founder and CEO of Kapruka.com. We're speaking to Dulith ahead of Kapruka's IPO, in which the company will be offering 20% of its stake to raise over 500 million rupees. Dulith, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You founded Kapruka in 2003, and the company has now grown into a customer base of over 1.1 million expats. What are the three things that helped you drive this significant growth?
Three things. So, I would say the first was my timing of starting Kapruka. Back then it wasn't even, e-commerce was not even big in India, but we started very early, and that gave me a lot of time to play around things, find out what are the products that has the margins, what are the products that we should stay away from. So, in e-commerce, there's a lot of like no-go areas that you need to define. If you don't mark those no-go areas, you end up losing your shirt. You will have top line, but you will not have anything after the GPs. Even getting EBITDA is very difficult in any general e-commerce companies. So, number one was the timing. And the second one, I would say that my focus on the expats from the beginning was a unique focus. Like generally, you try to dominate a market like Sri Lanka locally, right?
Yes.
But what I realized is in most developing countries, there's a big expat portion, about 10 to 15%. If you take like Pakistan, there's 300 million people, that means there's 30 million outside. If you take India, all the same. So Nepal, Bhutan, all these, the countries in this region has that pattern. So I went after that expat base, and it was much easier to target them because they already knew e-commerce before Sri Lanka. Like we take the Sri Lankan Australians, right? I mean, they see e-commerce happening around them all the time, bigger than here. So when they want to send something to Sri Lanka or something like that, so it's very easy to catch them. So we became a household brand. If you go to a expat house, there's at least a Kapruka fridge magnet somewhere, right? So it's like we become a household brand for the expat. So one is timing. Second, that the fact that we went after the expat base, and third is that I already mentioned the no-go areas that you demarcated. I think those are the three pillars of the. I mean, I can go for 15,
Okay.
But if I had to sort it,
The main three.
Yeah.
Right. Kapruka operates in a very competitive landscape, both locally and more so overseas. Who are the three main competitors you can identify?
Three main competitors are brick and mortar, and brick and mortar.
Okay.
Right? Because I get this question a lot. I mean, I don't even look at other websites. Like when it comes to e-commerce in Sri Lanka, it's still less than 1% of retail market, right? My customer, he goes to the puller, he goes to the supermarket, he goes to the mall. So why am I trying to compete with a 1%? It's still a very, there's only 2 or 3 pure e-commerce places. Actually, there's only 2 major pure e-commerce places, including me, in Sri Lanka for now. So until e-commerce hits about 7% of retail in a country, I will not care about websites. My competition is brick and mortar.
Right. E-commerce companies have experienced significant growth during the COVID pandemic period, with 57% of Kapruka's revenue originating outside Sri Lanka. How have these market segments grown historically?
Well, it doesn't even matter if you look at the historical patterns of how e-commerce has come in the last 20 years. You just condense the lens and just look at the tail of last 2 years. That's what really defines, because it is, what I'm seeing is people are searching, the search volumes have gone up really astronomically high. Even if you are looking for let's say, porcelain product, like, niche stuff, like you are looking for a hammer, a nail, generally you will not look for it online before the pandemic. You would, like, let's say I want to buy a hammer, right? I know, I'll just send a guy to a hardware and get it. But now I feel like opening the laptop and say, hammer Sri Lanka, right? So we started seeing a huge surge in niche stuff that came up, that people are not willing to go to Peta to buy. People are not wanting to, make that extra trip. So that is, we are learning from the search hits and, start offering those products. Like for example, I never thought I'll be, offering hammers and nails, right? So suddenly now you start offering hammers and nails. So that's the pattern we are seeing.
However, with the COVID situation, coming under control. For example, in the USC, the percentage of e-commerce sales declining as a percentage of entire retail sales. How do you see, with this new situation, the global e-commerce landscape changing?
So that's expected, right? I mean, it shots up like a rocket, but it will not come back to the ground zero. Right? It always comes back to a much more stable stage. Like now, let's say we saw a 15x increase when the country was shut down, and now it's at 6. Right? So it's still 6. Right? So you don't need to talk about the 15. It's like, hey, you have a 6. We are in the 6.
You mentioned 5 specific activities for which the IPO proceeds will be used. Can you elaborate a bit more on the activities and the timelines?
Okay, so I'll pick about 3 projects that will be interesting, but in addition to the 3 projects, we will be using some funds to uplift what we are already doing, like our fulfillment centers, our technology stack and all that. But if I take the 3 projects, one is we like to get into the used goods market. So there is a big demand for Parnabadu, and it can be a phone, it can be books, it can be vehicles. There is a large inventory of old goods that needs to be traded in the country, and there's only 1 or 2 platforms that does that. And even those platforms today are purely like listing platforms. So it's a phone call. Right? If somebody is trying to buy, let's say, a old sofa, you see a listing, you make a phone call, you got to go see it, you got to arrange a truck to deliver it. So there's so much missing in the actual the transaction except for the phone call. So we are trying to crack that and get into the used goods market, and we want to actually do it under a different brand called sold.lk, because we don't want to dilute the Kapruka brand. Kapruka brand is more for, you order it, you get it, it's perfect service, that kind of thing, and so this has to be a separate project altogether. So that's used goods. Second project that I'm excited about is B2B e-commerce market. B2B e-commerce is 8 times bigger than B2C in the world. If you just look up the stats, it's actually 8 times bigger. If you just look at Amazon corporate sales compared to the B2C sales, it's humongously different. And this is like something that most people who gets into e-commerce don't see, because they are more driven towards the retail market. But B2B is really huge. But my B2B is not about, okay, we are getting into more for HoReCa channel. So there are restaurants, there are hotels that want to buy groceries and supplies in bulk. Right? Let's say there is a hotel that wants to buy cases of water bottles, and they want to buy these 5-liter canisters of milk. They don't want to buy these smaller ones, right? So their buying patterns are very consistent and they are very different, and they are used to going to brick and mortar to buy them. So let's say you are a hotel, you have 10 different people supplying every week, and you have to have a clerk receiving all these things, negotiate different pricing, placing these orders. So that's a nice problem that we can come in and crack and get into the B2B sector, focus more on the HoReCa and the grocery channel. So it's not like I'm going to sell 10 ACs and 500 laptops for offices. We may get to that later, but this B2B project is more towards the HoReCa channel. So the third one is about cross-border e-commerce. So Kapruka today sells a lot of Sri Lankan brands on US Amazon, US eBay, US Etsy, and we are also going into the UK Amazon and Australia Amazon. We become an e-distributor for local brands. So let's say, let's take a great tea brand, let's say Dilma. Right? Today, if you buy Dilma tea on Amazon, US, you are buying through us. Right? So we have parked inventory. Now, how did Dilma sell before at Walmart in the US? Because you had a distributor there who was good at getting stuff into a shelf of Walmart. So the brand connects with the distributor and goes into Walmart. But there is nobody that will do it into Amazon. So we become like the e-distributor of choice. So we've lined up and we've had great contracts. It's like super brands in Sri Lanka. We have about 15 good brands. So I've experimented this, started this last year and a half, and it's growing like crazy. So why not make it a project, use some IPO proceedings to do this. So you would notice that I'm really transforming here. I'm not putting all the things in one basket of e-commerce, because e-commerce, is going to get, B2C e-commerce is going to get tougher and tougher and tougher. Right now it may look all sexy or 6 times growth and all that, but I'm trying to build a 100-year lasting company, right? It's going to be tougher and tougher and tougher. That is why these 3 projects that I just told you, B2B e-commerce, soldout.lk, which is more classifieds, and selling Sri Lankan products on Amazon, the US, is very diversified from B2C e-commerce, but still it's e-commerce.
Let's talk valuations. Talk us through your profitability and revenue forecasts. For FY21 to FY24, your revenue is forecast to grow at a CAGR of 34%. Where is most of this growth coming from?
The most of the growth right now comes from the surges that we've had. I remember I told you in 2015 and now it has settled down at a 6. That's 6. And in e-commerce, after certain tipping points, economies of scale really starts to kick in. And people ask me like, wow, your profitability is like going up like nuts. It's because the economies of scales are kicking in. Let me explain you what in a simple example. So now we have a delivery every half a kilometer. If I'm sending a delivery vehicle from here in Colombo 5, from here to let's say Moroto, there's a delivery every half a kilometer because I have now the liquidity of the orders to be able to do that. Suddenly your delivery cost comes down by 50%. If earlier it was at a delivery every 1 kilometer, but the same truck was going, same driver was going, nothing changed, same amount of fuel, but suddenly your cost comes down. So there are a lot of fixed costs in e-commerce models because we don't have, and just because our sales have doubled doesn't mean I have to open 2 outlets. We don't need to do that, right? So most of the fixed costs are staying solid, and the economies of scale kicks in, and then really the machine starts to work so much better. That is why you are seeing those performances.
Your operating margins jumped to 19.8% during the first 7 months of FY22, and this margin has been maintained throughout the forecast period as well. How confident are you that you can maintain these margins given issues like supply chain constraints, freight charges increasing, and local distribution costs increasing? What do you think?
We will have to sustain it mainly because we will not be shy to adjust our pricing and things based on global problems and global price changes. If I'm shy to change those prices, if I postpone those decisions, worrying about if there'll be less demand and all that, that we are not doing justice for the company. Right? So we are. I mean, it's not only our problem; it's a global problem. It's a nation problem, right? If a price of bananas keeps going up, it will have to be passed on. So we have to keep it up. And I think it will be, because whatever we are selling is, we are not the only seller, right? It's sold in other places as well. So we just need to keep it up with the pricing.
Final question. Why did you opt for the equity market as opposed to your other options like venture capital or private equity, where you could have demanded a higher valuation?
Good question. So if I go to the rich guys to raise money, let's say I get one VC who wants to come in, I think his thinking will also always be exit, right? How can I exit? Because I myself has put in money into smaller companies, and then I'm like, all I'm thinking is, okay, what about an exit? But if I go to them through a stock market, right, I will not have that problem, and I will have more freedom because the types of things that Kapruka has been doing and the 3 projects that I told you can be highly debatable, right? So I need to have very less distractions on the innovation is my main thing. So if I go to VC, if I go to private equity, I will lose more of that freedom. Plus I will have board members who are very exit oriented. Right? That's why I'm trying to avoid.
Thank you very much, Dulith, for joining us, and wish your company all the best for the upcoming IPO.
Thanks for having me.
Until we meet again with another interesting discussion, stay safe.